I'm Don Murray from Safe Software, and I'm here with Dean Hintz, and we're excited to be presenting this morning with our friends with Spatial DNA. And we're going to talk about how to use FME Server as an enterprise service bus.
Yeah, I'm Dean Hintz, and we also have with us Neil Hellis from Spatial DNA over there in Ontario. Yep. So welcome, Neil.
Hi.
And yeah, we're going to talk about ESB, specifically how to use FME to support enterprise-wide data integration using an enterprise service bus. And I think it's a useful pattern which shows how you can manage and scale complexity within the enterprise. So I'm going to jump right into it. Perfect. So first of all, just a few words about FME, and then we're going to talk about what are some of those major integration challenges faced by the enterprise and how an ESB approach can help. And then we'll look at it, FME Server, and see how that has a lot of components that can support an ESB. And then Spatial DNA will walk through some of their examples, and then after that, I'll walk you through an example demo that will be distributed after the webinar. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So the challenge is we've always got new technology coming at us, and a lot of it involves innovative solutions, and there's also innovative ways to combine it all. But with new systems constantly being added, that work of system integration, it's never really finished. Yeah, it's always an ongoing challenge. So how can we make that process a bit easier?
Right, and at SAFE we see the future belonging to razor-focused applications that do one thing extremely well. So then the challenge becomes how do we connect those together so they look and function as a single powerful system from organization to organization.
Yeah. So we do data translation very well. We allow you to integrate with virtually any system, and because one system is different from another, that always involves some kind of data transformation. Yeah. And we aim to give you tools that allow you to do that with essentially a graphical interface, so no coding is required. So just a snapshot of some things that you might integrate with FME, anything from Salesforce, so like new cloud-based technologies to old legacy systems like Oracle, Slack, and then of course any format or protocol you might think of, whether it's XML or JSON or even just a spreadsheet.
Yeah, or any REST API. You can see API there, and that's really any REST API endpoint. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, people might be familiar with FME in terms of file translation, but now the world has expanded and everything's online. Everything's either in a database or up in the cloud. So we basically can speak to any number of these formats, whether it's Microsoft Azure or CouchDB, Tableau, and then in terms of extensibility, things like JDBC or any HTTP or REST call, anything that transmits or receives data, FME can connect to.
Exactly. JDBC on its own has hundreds and hundreds of different endpoints. So
yeah. And we even use a lot of open source libraries that allow us to connect to a lot of formats. So there's a number of ways of deploying FME. You've got desktop, which allows you to author data transformations on your workstation. Then you can, with a click of a button, publish that to server, and now you've got a web service that anyone in the organization can access. And then if you have the option of publishing to the cloud, anybody on the web can access that. So there's lots of options there for how to use FME and how to give anyone, even if they don't understand FME, the ability to benefit from it. So specifically focusing today on server, we have a number of services that you can deploy through FME Server. There's straight up automation, so setting a task to run on a schedule every night. Data delivery, so you can stream JSON or KML directly to a client. Data download, that's sort of your clip, zip, and ship, any format you want. And scalability, where basically you have limits to what you can do on your desktop. On server or in the cloud, you can throw as many engines at it as you want, so scaling. And today we'll focus a lot on the real time or near real time. So how do we transmit messages and receive and react to events? So specifically, we're looking at the notification service. So sometimes it can take a little bit to get your head around this, because it is sort of a different world from just, you know, reading and writing from a file or a database, because we've got this whole event or message-based system. And so a notification, just think of it something that happens in near real time. And then we have this whole publisher subscriber model where a publisher, all the publisher needs to know about is what topic he's publishing to, and all the subscriber really needs to know about is what topic they're listening from. So that's what makes that whole loosely coupled structure. So one publication, let's say you could think of it like somebody pulls an alarm. Well, that could be one action, and there could be a number of people listening to that alarm. So it might be either people hear it and leave the building, or it could be the police or fire department. Everybody might have a slightly different reaction to that alarm going off. So they just need to know about the topic that they're interested in, not how the message is being used. So we mentioned scheduling. So that's when you have an event that happens at a regular interval. And then REST APIs is often how we connect things, because that way you don't have to understand the inner workings of a service. You just need to know, how do I interact with it? Yeah. And then the message is, how do we get information to and from? So we need to have a consistent structure and protocol for those messages to work.
Right, and once one person builds a connection using our REST API, we have this FME hub where we encourage users and we publish it. So lots of users are publishing these to the FME hub. So then future users don't even have to know what the REST API is. They just have nice building blocks they can drag and drop into the FME interface. So the whole community benefits from that.
So this is just a snapshot that I like, showing the API landscape even more than a year ago. So yeah, it can be a bit intimidating, all these tools that are out there. On the other hand, think of the opportunity of, you could just Google these different APIs, go to GitHub, and it's just amazing the power that's out there if you can leverage it. So FME helps you manage this seeming chaos there and leverage the bits that you actually need to solve your problem. So now zooming in on the enterprise, what's the challenge we're addressing? Well, typically the average enterprise has a number of different business applications that don't necessarily talk to each other. HR might have one system, accounting another one, customer relations something else, and they all sit on top of their own database. But importing and exporting might be involved, like copying and pasting or exporting to a text file. Like, it's not easy to interconnect them. And so what happens is you get these data silos with perhaps duplicate information, where somebody has to do data entry of the same thing a few times just to push information through for one customer or one particular workflow. So any integration that does happen typically is ad hoc, manual, or point-to-point. And we'll see in a second why that makes it very difficult to scale or manage. Today, it just happened to be that we both have examples from 311. So 311 is essentially a non-emergency reporting system that many cities have. And we think it's a great example of how a messaging application where one user or one citizen reports a problem, and it could go to any of a number of different service departments within the city. And so the challenge there is, how do you manage all that interconnectivity in a way that doesn't just become more and more complex? So it's easy enough when you do it for one system, but adding 5 more makes it, bogged down.
You get that n squared problem.
Yeah, so we'll have a look at what that looks like here, and then we'll see a few examples of it. So here, let's say we have a message database for the 311 messages, and let's say we connect it up to engineering and to public safety. That doesn't look too complicated, because we've only essentially got 3 systems that each need to talk to each other. Now when we add one more system, suddenly everything has to connect to everything. Now we have almost double the number of connections. Yeah. And then we get a memo from the legal team saying, we actually have to separate out all our customer contact information from the message database, because we have to manage privacy of information. And now, again, we got this whole sort of square of the number of connections. So that can, just imagine over time, any one of those systems has to have an upgrade. now you've got a
schema changes in one of the databases. Yeah.
So the whole idea of an enterprise service bus, the word bus is just a techie term for everything communicates through the same channel or the same pipe, and so each system only has to know how to connect to that pipe, and then
talk the schema of the pipe.
Yeah. And then there's routing, and within that system that allows it to be the message to be directed where it needs to go. Then when we add a new system, we really just have to map to and from that common pipe, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there may be new information in there that the other systems could benefit from, but everything will just keep working the way it was working before. And I'll run through a few examples of how FME, if you have FME, you already have a lot of the tools needed to build an ESB. So in terms of routing data between systems, which is a requirement of ESB, FME has testers, filters, notifiers. So being able to check the value of a category and direct it to the right destination. And transforming between different formats and protocols, we have the XML and JSON templater. We have lots of tools for both consuming and composing those, as well as the ever powerful HTTP caller, which lets you talk to almost anything HTTP. Mm-hmm. And then we have this idea in an ESB, some requests and responses are synchronous and some are asynchronous. That means sometimes you wait for an answer, sometimes you just fire off a message and let someone else worry about it. And so you have that control in the job submitter. You can say wait for complete or not. And we have different service types. So there's data streaming, or you might just use something like email, which is async. And then the whole publish subscribe model, well, we have that with the notification service in FME Server. And in terms of the events and messages themselves, we have the various publisher subscriber protocols, everything from Amazon SNS to HTTP post or JMS. So there's lots of ways of connecting to the topics. And in terms of extendability, you can actually chain these dependencies through different notifications to build fairly complex workflows. And so having a workspace in the middle, you can both have a workspace as a subscriber and a publisher. So you can think how the workspace can add logic and build fairly sophisticated chains of these processes. And finally, in terms of metadata is always important in terms of somebody new to a system, what functions are available, what is the structure required, and so the FME Server API really gives users an access to describe the services that the server is set up for. Okay, so over to Spatial DNA, and Neil is going to walk through a couple of examples of how they've been working with ESB.
All right, I assume you can all see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks great.
All right, so I'll just sort of restate some of what Dean just talked about from the context of our experience with our clients. We work a fair bit with municipalities or other sort of large organizations, and they have tens or dozens of different departments which over time have ended up being really siloed. So you can think in your own municipality, there's probably a roads department, there's a parks and recreation department, there is a separate department that handles these 311 calls, there's probably a GIS department. All these different departments have grown up and ended up with their own information systems that are completely segregated from one another. So there is this growing need for integration between these different information systems. But so far, what we've been finding as we go into these engagements is that a lot of the integration is done on an ad hoc basis, and it's really difficult to maintain that and grow it over time. So this is where that enterprise service bus concept really comes into play as as a straightforward approach that an organization can take to really break down those silos and start sharing information, giving them more value and better ability to serve their customers. So I'll just restate again what we think an enterprise service bus is, and this is a bit of a a techie way of describing it, but an architecture that virtualizes events and messages between systems. So the bus itself doesn't need to know about the specifics of each of the individual systems. It just needs to be able to connect to them and send or receive messages. So my works department work order management system doesn't need to know the specifics about my customer data or anything like that. I'll let the bus take care of that. So there's three key capabilities that we need to fulfill here. So the first is be able to receive these requests or events from different systems. The bus needs to be able to translate the messages, whether that's the schema or the protocol or what have you, some sort of translation there. And then being able to route that event or message onto the relevant systems, whoever's interested, whoever's listening. So these three traits kind of make up the, in my opinion, the core of what an ESB is. But it's interesting because those are also really key traits of what FME Server does. So FME Server, can take in requests from different systems. It's really good at doing translation and schemas or protocols, and being able to fire that off to other services or other systems. So that made us think that FME Server would actually be a really great candidate to fulfill the role of an ESB in some of these organizations. So as we all know, FME Server, it's a great tool for enterprise integration. It's event-driven. So as Dean mentioned, the whole publish-subscribe model that's built into FME Server really allows us to start triggering workspaces based on an event that has happened, whether that's in workspace or whether it's from an external system, calling an endpoint or sending a JMS message. FME Server has a service-oriented architecture, which is, I guess, really just a fancy way of saying that it's API enabled. You could, define that in different ways if you want. But what we really like about FME Server is that everything is basically controlled by FME Server's REST API. So that means that we can connect to it easily from other systems, and we can start putting together those pieces in a nice web API enabled way. The enterprise service bus patterns and capabilities, Dean just walked through all of those, so I won't repeat those, just to say that it gives us a lot of flexibility in how we integrate together these different systems, and I'll show you that momentarily. But the key thing is that FME Server allows us to avoid that point-to-point integration where we have that n-squared problem of more and more connections needed as we add more systems into the mix. So let's say that in my enterprise, I've got, let's say a dozen different systems that I need to integrate together. And we've already seen this diagram here. That's a ridiculous number of sort of point-to-point connections that we're going to need to make if we need to share information between these different data silos. So it's not really scalable. If we were to go into a client and say we're going to integrate these systems together, it would take us forever to build all these different interconnections, and then it'll take a huge amount of effort just to maintain those over time. As the systems get upgraded, as the systems get replaced, if something breaks, we don't know where it's broken, so it's really difficult to maintain. And you can see that here, if you only have one or two systems you're trying to put together, it's not too bad. You can get a pretty good value for cost if you're just doing point-to-point. But really quickly, those costs, primarily to do with maintenance, really get exponentially, they outweigh the value that you're going to get. So point-to-point approach isn't something that we recommend. And instead, what we like to do is look at the sort of hub and spoke approach. And we like to put FME Server in the middle of this because it allows each of these different systems to be able to connect to FME directly. And then FME can do the brokering of the messages, the translation of the messages between all these different systems based on the business rules that we have. It reduces the amount of maintenance that we need to have over time, and risk as well too. When you go into these enterprise integrations, a lot of our clients are interested in having a risk-free approach So this is a nice way to look at it as well. So here's an example. We've been working with, as I mentioned, a number of municipalities on 311 implementations or enhancements to basically extend their 311 system into these different departmental systems. And I'll show you some examples of that momentarily. But just to restate, 311, it's the non-emergency number in your town for getting access to city services or reporting problems. You know, there's a pothole at the end of my street, there's a fallen tree, that sort of thing. There's kind of a couple key capabilities that we try to bring to our 311 projects. The first is that we want to be able to take the service request that a citizen has called in about and be able to route it to the specific department. So the pothole complaint might have to go to the roads department, or the fallen tree complaint might need to go to the parks department, something like that. The second thing is that we want to be able to provide information to citizens on the status of their call. So I called in about that pothole. Has anybody had a look at it? When is it going to be fixed? So being able to provide that transparency back to the citizens is really important and really needs to have an integrated approach so that you can share information between these different systems. We work a lot with the Salesforce platform. This is a popular CRM, customer relationship management system. There's other ones that 311 systems utilize. A lot of municipalities we work with also use the ESB platform as a house for their GIS data. So this is where we would use it for geocoding or address validation. Often location of assets are contained in the GIS, so where are the fire hydrants in the city, which road is that pothole on, that kind of thing. And then there's a number of different sort of work order or service request management systems that we've found that municipalities tend to use. So Maximo, Amanda, CityWorks, JD Edwards. These are common ones. We've built connectors into each of these. These are all handling the different service requests in the department specific. So again, the point-to-point approach here, we would have to build a number of different connectors into these individual systems, and then it would be a kind of a mess to maintain over time. So instead, the approach that we've taken is place FME in the middle and have it connect to each of these systems. Now we have a way to easily manage messaging going back and forth between the CRM, the GIS data for enhancing and validating the data, and the back office work order management systems. So how does it work? Here's just a quick sort of architectural view of how we do our implementations, or some of our implementations. You'll see on the sides representation of each of the different systems. So Salesforce comes with a REST API. It has its own messaging protocol for sending outbound messages. Amanda has a SOAP API, CityWorks a REST API. So we've got all these systems that we start with. In the center, we start with FME. And the first thing that we do is we build listeners or readers into each of these systems. So these are basically an FME workspace that we've published to FME Server. And they're really simple workspaces. All they do is they just listen for a particular message from that system and transform it into some sort of common schema of what we call a canonical model. And we push that into a FME notification topic using the publication approach. So we have different topics that we've created on FME Server. So for example, a new service request, an update to a service request, or a status change in that service request. And then we build a corresponding set of FME workspaces that we publish to FME Server, which are basically responsible for writing into those target systems. And these writers are basically subscribed to the topics of interest. So for example, our Maximo writer might be listening for the new service request topic, and whenever it gets that message, it's going to grab the information that's contained on that topic, convert it to the Maximo specific format, and push it to Maximo using the SOAP API. So each of these are just little building blocks that we use to be able to read from each of the systems of interest, push data in a canonical model to the publish subscribe mechanism, and then corresponding writers that push information out to the different systems there. So in that approach, we've actually covered a lot of the different capabilities in ESB. We've got, external events, we've got inbound and outbound APIs, notifications, and the canonical model. So FME Server has a lot of these capabilities, and we find that it's really useful for building out these kind of what can be start off as simple architectures, but grow really quickly. So just to walk through some example kind of workspace snapshots here. So receiving a message, if we were to get a message from Salesforce, basically it comes in as XML. We use some of the built-in FME transformers. So in this case, an XML fragmenter that just allows us to decode that message into FME features and attributes. The next thing we use is some schema mappers or attribute value mappers, some other FME transformers, just to be able to convert that source data into our canonical form, the ESB schema. Sometimes we enrich the content. So as the message is going through the service bus, we might have business rules that say, I'm going to add on some extra data here before I send it out to my interested systems. In this case, we're calling a geocoding service just to validate an address and get back a set of coordinates. And then finally, we notify all the interested subscribers. So we're basically pushing that message now that it's formatted correctly, now that it's enriched, we're pushing that onto the bus, which is FME Server, and saying anybody who's interested can now grab this message and do something with it. So if we have one of these target systems, say Maximo, that's interested in listening for that message, we're basically just going to grab the content from that topic. This comes in on the subscriber, the workspace subscriber. We're basically, again, using a JSON flattener to convert that into FME features and attributes. Again, schema mappers or attribute value mappers to convert that data to the schema of the target system. And then finally, in this case, we're calling an API endpoint using the HTTP caller. So we use this quite often, especially if there's a web service enabled on the other end, whether it's SOAP, whether it's REST. It's a really powerful transformer for us to be able to push messages into downstream systems. So here's an example from one of our clients that recently did a 311 implementation, and prior to using FME Server, they had a real issue with creating work orders when a citizen called in with a specific request. So the scenario was that the citizen would call the 311 line to report a pothole on the end of their street. The 311 service representative would record that in the 311 system, except they would also write the call details down in an email and send that off to the works department. So the works department would get this email and then they would print it out. And then there was some unfortunate staff member who was responsible for taking this stack of email printouts and then typing them in to their work order management system so that somebody in the roads department could go and look at that pothole and determine if it was going to be fixed or not. So you can imagine that this was really not very efficient and really is a worst case scenario of data silos between different departments. There was actually a 2-week lag between the time that the customer called and the time that the works department actually got the work order created in their system, just because of the backlog of these emails. And it also took a full-time staff member all their time just to print out and enter this data. You can imagine that sort of retyping this information led to a lot of data entry errors, and there was no real way for the citizen to call back and say, hey, have you actually looked at that pothole that I reported 2 weeks ago? So this was a kind of a worst case scenario that we were able to resolve using FME Server. So in the new paradigm, the town implemented a Salesforce implementation. Salesforce would send its message to FME Server saying, I have a new service request for a pothole. We have a simple workspace that's published there to listen to those Salesforce messages and then publish some information to the FME notification system. We then had a separate FME service that was listening for that, the Maximo update service, which would grab the information about that new service request and push it into Maximo, and then grab the ID from the corresponding Maximo work order and push that back into Salesforce, again, through the notification system and another workspace that would be used for Salesforce updates. So what this ended up meaning was that the client then had the ability to create work orders in their backend system almost immediately from the time that initial call was logged. At the same time, they were also able to validate and enrich the data. So you'll see in the corner there, we're using Esri as a geocoding service. We were able to do things like address validation and identify which asset is associated with that specific problem that was reported. And lastly, this approach allows us to create linkages between the 311 system and the work order management system, so that as the status of that work order changes, as soon as somebody goes out and inspects it, as soon as somebody schedules it for repair, we're able to propagate that information back to the CRM and back to the citizens so that they know what's going on with their particular request. So it provides some transparency. A really great benefit of this approach is that when the system needs to be expanded out, say there's a new department that wants to get integrated into this, this system here, adding in a new backend system is quite easy, because all we need to do now is just add in 1 or 2 more FME services that can connect into this same notification system and leverage the same canonical model that we have. So in this case here, if we wanted to add in CityWorks as an example, we just have to add in a CityWorks update workspace and push messages into CityWorks in the same way that we do with Maximo. So it's really easy to add on new systems and grow this enterprise service bus. We can reuse the existing components we built, and then that means that adding on new systems is measured in just days or weeks instead of months, which is what would typically we'd see. So the kind of path forward, the way that we've been seeing things in our clients, strategic visions, that's kind of like a heady abstract thing, and many people who work with FME directly aren't so interested in strategic visions. But what we find is a lot of our clients have strategic visions that include some or all of a customer focus, culture of openness, transparency and reporting results. These are themes that we're seeing again and again in many organizations. What this means is that data silos within those organizations are going to have to break down in order to meet those visions. So if you still have data silos in your organization, they're going to be broken down for you whether you like it or not. and if you're still resistant, then all your competitors are going to do that before you will. That's coming. That's going to happen. If you want to go forward with a kind of an ESB approach or any kind of event-driven approach within your organization, it's probably best to sort of look at your current business processes right now and try and identify things that are quasi-automated or could easily be automated. Look at things that you are doing right now, which maybe don't make sense. And if you had some sort of message-driven or event-driven approach, you might be able to streamline some of your business processes. And that leads us to our sort of last thought, is that if you do go down this path, start small. Don't try and integrate all your systems together at once. Pick 1 or 2 that you want to work with initially and prove out the concept. Find out how it works for you, find out your pain points, and then grow from there so that you have a bit of experience and that you can grow it more easily and start reusing some of those components that you built in the first phase of things. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dean and Don and let them continue on with their demo.
Great, that was super, Neil, and I really, fantastic demos and use case, sharing how you built a 311 solution. And your last point is one that we believe a lot at SAFE. Any successful complex system started off as a successful simple system. So start small, and then you're also cutting your teeth learning how to do all this, when you only have 1 or 2 systems to talk to, and then you can grow. You can grow from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked your worst case scenario. I'm a big fan of worst case scenarios, as Don knows. And yeah, that was pretty gnarly with the phone calls and emails and then retyping stuff in. So and just thinking of all that duplicated effort, duplicated information, and how you guys came up with that FME Server solution ESB approach. That was really cool. So along that line, this 311 theme, we're going to dive into the demo I have here and what we'll make available perhaps on the hub, I guess. Is that
yeah, and also I think, yeah, there will be an email sent out to everybody who registered. And one of the things in the email will be links to all the resources from the slides to how to get this demo in.
Yeah. So I'll just dive right into the weeds here. And if this does get a little bit technical, have no fear. I'm just trying to give you a brief overview of how this demo works. And then when you guys have a chance to play with it afterwards, you'll be able to, at least you'll be familiar with the general process, and then you can look at the individual workspaces and how the whole thing's set up. So to begin with, I just want to zoom in and focus just on the topics. So we have a number of topics for passing updates back and forth between systems. So we have, for example, the engineering update, the safety update, and then the 311 message database update. So those are essentially the topics that become the core of this ESB. So there's the whole architecture. That's essentially what I had whiteboarded in my office, and so you guys have a snapshot of how the system works. Now, to make more sense of that, I'm just going to show you the workflow, similar to what Neil was talking about. When somebody has a problem and they report it to the city, where does that go? So if they send in an email or hit submit on a web form, that's a message that goes into the 311 database. Then the next step is there's a message transmitter. So that's on a schedule, runs every minute, and that filters the message by category and then maps it to that canonical model. So that's the 311 standard, or sort of the ESB standard. So that goes into the safety update topic. Then there is a workspace that is subscribed to that topic, and so that's real time. As soon as that top gets notified, that workspace runs and loads a new record into the safety database. Then there's somebody who's working within the safety department, and they interact in their own system. All they see is there's a new record shows up in their database. There's a status is open, and they have to assign that to one of their staff to work on it. Eventually, they resolve the problem in some way and update the database. And then the next step is there's another scheduled workspace which basically looks for updates, looks for status changes in the database and pushes those back into the 311 update topic. And then there's the process update workspace subscribes to that topic. Anytime something happens there, it right away updates the master database, message database over here on this side on the 311. And at any point in time, we can run reports on that database. So that's the basic workflow that we're going to see in a second.
Now these database, these messages from the databases, with FME, they could be done one of two ways. One, you could poll periodically. The other one is you could set up triggers on the database.
That's right.
Some organizations love triggers, other organizations do not like triggers at all. So FME can do either.
You can do it either way. So yeah, there's some things here you'll notice that have a little bit of a delay. If you did it with triggers, then it would be closer to near real time. So here is the web form, but I'm just going to jump over to the actual demo and run through it, and then we'll go through exactly how it all works. So my name is Johan van Plasmoiden. I live on Main Street. Let's say this is over in Surrey. And the problem I'm going to report today is I saw a off-leash cat. This is a real example because I happen to live in a townhouse complex with a fairly
aggressive off-leash cat?
No, more of an aggressive off-leash strata council that keeps tracks of these sorts of things.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's the kind of thing that makes it into the minutes of the monthly meetings. Yeah. So what happens is there's the notification, and so that's gone into the database. And so what I'll do first of all is I'll show you from the master database. I can run a report based on, let's see, this date range, and you can see that there's a new record in there. Now it's already showing up as open. So what happened was it already got sent into I guess there's a scheduled process, and so it's been sent to the safety database through the ESB. Then if I change, and now I'm wearing the hat of the ESB, sorry, the safety database. So I'm the safety officer now.
In that notification window, that is the canonical form of the messages that are sent between all the different things. Yeah. And this, in your case, you chose Jason, right?
That's right.
Jason? Yep.
Yeah. All right, so now if I'm looking at the safety database, this has been assigned. So the off-leash cat, somebody has been assigned a public safety officer. Will go investigate, see where that cat is and see if it's causing some trouble. All right.
Try to herd the cat, off-leash cat.
Try to herd them. And then what he can do is, okay, he can decide that that's resolved, that cat is not going to bother anyone anymore.
Leashed it.
Yeah. And so he's going to resolve that, and then I'm just going to watch here for a second, for a minute or two, and what happens is that gets updated in the database, and now you see the notification go by, and there was a scheduled job or scheduled workspace that is watching for changes in the database, and now it has sent that back to the master.
Right. And
so now I'm going to wear the hat of the 311 manager, and I want to see what's going on with all my 311 records, and we can now look and see that this has been closed. So this is now we're back to the message management system, and we can see that messages. So we basically completed that whole circuit.
Right.
And yeah, like I said, if this kind of went by a bit quick, this will be publicly accessible after the webinar, and you can play with it all you want and report any missing pet you might imagine.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. And so and the thing I wanted to highlight here is I'm not expecting you to read what's going on with the notifications, but this is just a view into that bus where the different topics going back and forth. All right. So just a couple of more things to highlight here. So that's just the web forms that we saw, and a nod to Gerhard. He's the one who basically took, you can run all this from FME Server, but making this web form just makes it that much easier to interact with. So something I'm going to highlight here, in terms of deploying this, I deployed it using a project, which was new in 2017. Project content, that whole list there, everything from the workspaces to subscriptions, notifications, topics, all that can be put into a project. So to deploy this, all I had to do was basically, in this case, I sent Gerhard a project file, and then we just loaded it onto the FME demo server, and all I had to do was edit the connections.
Right.
So there were database connections and the actual server connection, web connections, and that's it. There was didn't have to change any of the workspaces.
So the project allows you to package up a complete FME server solution that has many, many components into one file, one deployable file.
Yeah. And just a look under the hood, here are the different notifications that drive some of those workspaces. Yeah. And then most of those, there's like 12 workspaces involved. Basically a third of them are tied to notifications, and then the rest are scheduled. Yeah. And there's just those database connections that I mentioned. So that's the public message loader. So that would sit behind, let's say, a web form, and it just drives the a message to the database and also updates the notification on server. The message transmitter, I'm just going to pop that up very briefly. So this just shows that we're checking for all messages that are new. So what happens is once the 311 database is updated, we have a scheduled task which looks for new messages and then pushes those into the ESB. And as we saw earlier, one of the key aspects of any ESB is filtering or routing. And so this is where the routing is happening. Basically, if there's an engineering or task, in this case it was public safety, then that gets filtered out the safety port here, and we build up a message specific to, to tie into the ESB. And then send that over to the notifier, and the notifier notifies that particular topic, which was public safety.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight that. And so that's the message itself, and you can see the topic highlighted. And something I wanted to point out with some of these, the message routing workspaces, is that often what will happen is you'll have either a JSON reader or a text line reader, and that might seem like, okay, why are we reading from a text file when it's a message? So typically how you prototype this or how you test it is on FME desktop, you have a sample message locally.
Yeah.
And then you can test it out that way. And then when you publish it to server, then you actually publish it so that it subscribes to a specific topic.
That's right. And
that's
right. Yeah. And then the FME server infrastructure ensures that that text reader or JSON reader actually gets the content of that message. Yeah.
Yeah. So that becomes essentially a data pipe to drive that workspace. And so that's how it's really quite easy to prototype something locally and then publish it and watch it work in real time. And this is an example of the other end where we look for a change in, like in this case, it's when is the task resolved, and then we notify. So we push a notification to a topic. And this is just updating the 311 database. So just a couple of key takeaways. ESB basically allows you to manage complex systems. You can add new systems without having to increase the complexity. So you increase the capacity without increasing complexity. FME and FME Server notification service provides a lot of the ESB functionality and components that you would need to build that. We've shown here a very simple example, but I think one that demonstrates all the key pieces, and you could take that sort of pattern and apply it in your own organization and at least have something to play with, and hopefully that gives you some ideas on how to configure FME Server. And it also illustrates that to explain this without that diagram, I had a few runs at trying to explain this thing, and I would end up having to show people a snapshot of my whiteboard, because without an actual diagram, you can get lost. Yeah. So do take the time to actually lay out and make sure the way you're mapping your messages actually makes sense, and even put down the workspace names. I find that was quite helpful. And the other key, which Neil pointed out, is you do have to carefully design the common data model for the ESB that everything's going to pass through, and make sure the key elements are captured and that you're able to have some header information that allows you to do the routing. And as both Don and Neil have said, start simple, get some early success, and then figure out how to expand.
Right. So the key, so just to reiterate the key things that you highlighted there, the one key thing for sure is define that canonical JSON message data model. And that could change as you add new systems, because a new system might add more data that before you didn't have. Right. But the other nice thing about JSON is the receivers, when they get JSON, they can really take what they need and ignore the rest. And because it's JSON, you don't have to update those, because if I get a JSON message that all of a sudden has extra tags, my workspace is fine. I don't have to go and re-edit that as I add a new system.
You can add new functionality without breaking the existing components or existing system. Yeah, and I just wanted to, highlight a few of the things, the components or tools in FME that you might need to consider when building an ESB and with any enterprise integration. So there's a lot of challenges in terms of how to connect these systems together. And so here's some of the key workflows. You often have to do field name mapping, field value mapping, lookup mapping, and then things like validation rules. So FME has a lot of tools to support this. Attribute Manager, that came in a couple of releases ago, and that lets you manage a lot of field and value mapping all within one transformer. And you can even have things like conditional mappings. This is an example from this demo where we basically, on the web form, somebody might choose safety, and that gets mapped to public safety, or traffic gets mapped to engineering. So that's an example of a value map. And then validation. You know, if you have a complex system, you might need to have a validator which checks a message, and if it doesn't fit the model, it might reject the message.
Yeah, and so you would have to add, I mean, in a production one, you would add a topic that was like invalid message.
Yeah.
And then somebody would be listening on that, who because, you know, if one of your workspaces gets some arbitrary JSON that it has, I have no idea what this is, you would want to send that to an invalid message topic, so then the system itself could capture that and say, well, who's sending this message and what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that I've heard Neil point out before, is you want to make sure you either fail gracefully or at least don't let messages disappear.
That's right, that's right.
So if there's a problem with the message, make sure it gets reported somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to wrap up some key points here. So we have this dilemma as you grow the enterprise. You don't just grow the amount of data, but also the complexity of all the different systems that have to talk to each other. The ESB pattern or approach helps us manage that growth. It might be initially slightly more complicated because you got to talk to this middle layer, but this sort of what some people term virtualization means that it's much more easy to extend the functionality or the capacity. And the FME and FME Server's notification service, you can configure that as your ESB. It makes it easy to add new systems and scale capacity without increasing complexity. And in general, just thinking of ways to use the notification service allows you to do that kind of loosely coupled approach and make your services event-driven. I just wanted to highlight a couple of webinars. There's sort of a tie-in to some previous webinars this year that you'll see if you want more information and you happen to miss these, I would encourage you to check it out. So there's FME as an enterprise integration platform that we did back in August, and then web services and web data back in March. There was a couple of good UC talks as well that were related. And up and coming. Don, I'm sure you're going to be involved in one or two of these.
Probably both. Hey, the second one's a nice birthday present for me. So there you go.
There you go. Perfect.
So maybe an ice cream cake after.
Yeah, so lots of cool stuff coming in 2018, and tune in, stay tuned, and you'll find out more. And lots of resources. So we got Neil's talk from the UC, as I mentioned, making FME your ESB. Server Playground, there's lots of examples that you can interact with. You can also download configurations, workspaces, JavaScript for those. The notifications docs, don't forget to read the instructions. We put a lot of time and effort into those and keep those up to date. A number of great tutorials on notifications, automation. Gerhard did the one on automation planning. And just working with stuff like JSON. So just the nuts and bolts of how do you take apart and put together JSON.
Yeah.
And stay tuned to the hub.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen with Dean's demo is he is going to, there will be a knowledge base article, and he'll also put it on the playground and in the hub, and then the knowledge base article can kind of walk through how to use it from the playground, because then you'll be able to have a working one, you'll be able to get all the resources, and of course we're here to help you as well. Yeah, so that's great.
Thanks from all of us. There's some contact info.
Yeah.
My email's pretty easy, and there's Neil's.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did want to have a little bit of time for some Q&A, and we do have Jennifer who has been helping us out with the Q&A. So I don't know, you can either chat to us. I'm not sure if you're on microphone or not, but were there any interesting questions that you want to highlight? So we'll.
I sent a few messages to Don with the interesting questions so you guys could see them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is Dale. While Don's looking through that, Dean or Don, somebody's asking what the playground is. You mentioned the playground. They don't know what that is.
Yeah, so just click on that link there, Dean. So that's good. Yeah. Yeah. So somebody asked, how do so what does the system do if one of the messages, the systems is down and they miss a message? And so what what we've had people ask in the past that's related to that is, how do I audit all the messages going by? And the nice thing about the topics is you can have multiple listeners. So, and then every listener on a topic would get the message. So for the audit trail, you could have on each topic, you could have an audit .fmw workspace that would then get every single message and effectively write it to a database of your or a data store of your choice. And then if a system was down, it would then be able to go there and get all the messages that it had missed. So that's something we didn't want to put into this demo because it starts to complicate things, but definitely you can do things like that as well. Yeah.
This is the playground, and I'm just showing you that you've got all these demos, and at some point we'll probably put this one here as well. And then what you can do is you can play with the demos, or you can actually go and
demos. You click developers. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. You can also go to the GitHub and get those.
Yeah.
In fact,
so click on one. You're already on. Yeah, there you go.
So you can go to GitHub here and
download the zip or
download
it or whatever you want. Yeah.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
Same thing here. Even for this demo, you can go to GitHub.
Yeah, and we will put this one on the playground. Yeah. There was another question about if lots of request messages come in, can FME Server handle it? Yeah, so if you have, it was an IoT-based question. If you have millions of messages coming in, and we do have clients who have used FME Server for millions of messages coming in, and what over a very short period of time, and what we do there is we dedicate an engine. We have another way of connecting to those high-speed streams. And that's on our FME, you would actually dedicate one engine to grabbing those messages and processing them in real time. And the nice thing is, if they're coming through JMS or something else, again, you could have multiple engines consuming those, because to take 1 million messages a second and pump it through the notification framework and generate the JSON and all that would be too much. This workflow here is more about what you're seeing with workflows, where you're not going to get millions of workflows coming in per second. You're going to get, you could have hundreds per minute, easily. But for really, really high speed data streaming, we do that. We have deployed that. We have some big customers who are processing millions of messages over a couple minutes. And but that's the way we do that too. So we'd be happy to talk to you about more details on that.
I was just going to mention that the way Gerhard wired in the notifications here, he actually used WebSockets.
Yeah.
So WebSockets is one of the protocols we use for a data pipe, where you have a constant, it's always open, and you're constantly funneling data, so you don't have the transaction overhead of creating a message and having a header and all that stuff. It's just, it's a data pipe.
That's right.
And that was used, well, I guess Palmerex for the lightning strikes. So all the lightning strikes in Canada in real time.
Yeah.
So there can be thousands of
it's amazing how many there are.
Per minute.
Yeah. And really, you have in the case of JMS and WebSockets, you have a choice of whether you want to go through the notification topic framework or the data stream framework, and that really depends on how the velocity of those messages that are coming through. Somebody else asked, how could FME as an ESB work in conjunction with other ESB platforms such as MuleSoft? And FME has a REST API, so you can invoke anything on FME with the REST API. And similarly, FME could invoke anything in MuleSoft, assuming that MuleSoft itself, enables you to publish workflows through REST APIs. They both can talk JSON, and so you can do that. What unique advantages does FME offer? FME is going for a different MuleSoft. To use MuleSoft, you have to be a very technical user. You're writing Java. You're writing. You need to be a coder. With FME, we're going up a layer, and we're striving to make it such that you do not need to be a coder. You do not need to know how to program in Java, JavaScript, or Python. So that's sort of the the differences. It's earlier days for FME for sure, but once FME 2018 comes out, you're going to see we'll be taking a big step into enabling users to more easily attack other enterprise patterns. So what are you showing here, Dean?
Well, I just wanted to highlight along those lines of tying in different APIs. We have the FME Hub, and more now we're publishing what we're calling web web connections. And so these are packaging up those APIs to things like LinkedIn, Microsoft 365, you name it. And so there's a lot. What the advantage there is, again, you don't have to be a coder. You just download that web connection, and now you can set the parameters, tie it into your workspace, and leverage those APIs. And then if that's all you were using MuleSoft for, well, then you wouldn't need it. You can just do it directly this way.
Somebody also asked, how would you pass large vector and raster geospatial data? What you would do is you would leave that data somewhere else that's cloud accessible, and then the message would be passed that would have a link or to the URL or wherever that data was. Yeah, you wouldn't want to grab a LiDAR file that could be a terabyte of data, try to generate it in JSON and throw it down the pipe. It just it would be a horribly inefficient approach to do that. Another question is, have you had pushback from clients about using FME for such business critical function as a potential single point of failure? The answer is no. We have users who have FME Server deployed across multiple hosts. And again, in 2018, FME Server, all the components are such that you can basically distribute FME Server across many machines. And if any one machine goes down, the system will still go up. So that's a major
active.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have failover. Yeah, we have a lot of enterprises, agencies that are using FME in mission critical applications where you just failure is not an option. So so in that case, you'd set up redundancy. You can look in the docs on active failover, and so if one system goes down, there's another system already up and running.
Yeah, and this has been a major amount of work in FME 2018 has been around how can we ensure that FME Server continues to function without a hiccup when we lose some hardware or a particular node goes down. So good. I think those are the.
I think, hey, I can tell that Don, one of our longtime FME customers, is asking if the filtering and the display of logs, because he makes the comment that in an ESB situation like this, you're going to have with lots and lots of jobs generating log files. Is the filtering of those logs in the FME 2018 a bit easier, so you can kind of pick out the logs you care about?
Yeah, great question. You can definitely monitor the log directory in FME. So, but we'll want to dig a little.
Yeah, I think that kind of alludes to things like Kibana, where you can do statistics on logs and you can sort of sift and filter through them.
I think it's more just the job log thing, you know, like when you, that one there that Dean's showing there. I think in FME 2018, we can filter this a bit better if you only wanted to see the logs related to one workspace, for example.
Yeah, that's right. Or just the ones that failed, for example.
Yeah,
now you, in 2018, you basically, on the status, you can click a button and then only see the ones that have failed. And then if you knew the user and the ones that have failed, for example, like Dean could pick on himself, and then, you know, then you would just see the ones that had failed. So yeah. So so lots of work going on there, enabling people to find what they want.
I think simply a filter there, so I could filter by repository, because I don't see that right now.
Yeah.
I did want to highlight really quick here just the project itself. I'm just clicking on the 311 ESB project, and you can see all the different components that went into that. Yeah. So there's the schedules, topics, subscriptions, and connections.
Yeah, and then if you want to give that to somebody, you just send them the project.
Yeah. So you can, and you know, sending that project is as easy as clicking on it and going export.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. So good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I just wanted to thank Neil for his great presentation and those real world examples of how they're actually implementing this. So, you know, certainly just like to give our thanks to Spatial DNA, the crew over there, and for all their.
Thanks for thanks for the webinar, guys.
No, thank you. And thanks everybody who attended, and we will answer every question. So you know, we will leave the webinar running for a few more minutes so you can ask your questions, and we'll get them, and for sure we'll reach out to you with answers. And then of course feel free to continue to connect with us through the community or directly or on live chat, and as questions come to you and you try to work with FME as an ESB. So thank you, Dean, for putting this together.
Thanks, Don.
Great job.
Great. Thanks, everyone.